Every life is a story, every moment a chapter. Here on Slow English Stories, we pause to listen.
Today, we journey into one of the most famous books ever written. We are exploring James Joyce's masterpiece, Ulysses.
We'll follow two men through a single day in Dublin, Ireland. A day that contains all of human life.
Let's begin our story on the morning of June 16th, 1904.
The morning of June 16th, 1904 began. It was a mild, salty morning over Dublin Bay. A young man named Stephen Dedalus stood atop the Martello Tower. He was watching his roommate, Buck Mulligan. Mulligan was a boisterous medical student.
Mulligan wore a yellow dressing gown. It billowed in the sea air. He held a shaving bowl high, like a chalice. He began a mocking version of the Latin Mass. The performance grated on Stephen's soul. Each disrespectful gesture was a small, sharp stone. It hit the fragile wall of his composure.
Stephen was a guest in this tower. He was a tenant of a man who showed him no courtesy. Mulligan's voice was full of mockery. "The ant thinks you killed your mother," he said. He turned his gray eyes from the sea to Stephen's face. "That's why she won't let me have anything to do with you."
The words landed like a physical blow. Inside Stephen, a ghost stirred. It was not a gentle spirit. It was a ghoul, a chewer of corpses. Its breath smelled like wetted ashes.
He saw her again as he always did. Her wasted body in loose grave clothes. Her glazing eyes staring out of death. Her hoarse, rattling breath. She begged him to kneel and pray. And he had refused.
Now, the remorse of his conscience was a constant, bitter taste. This guilt was a paralysis. It had followed him back from Paris. It arrested his art. It left him a moody, self-conscious intellectual. He was trapped by the masters he served, the British state, the Roman Church, and Ireland itself.
"Someone killed her," Stephen said. His voice was heavy with a gloom Mulligan could not understand. He felt the key to the tower in his pocket. It was his key, but Mulligan had demanded it. Mulligan had taken over his home and his grief. He would not sleep here tonight. He could not.
At that same hour, across the city, another man was beginning his day. His name was Mr. Leopold Bloom. He lived at number 7 Eccles Street. He was a 38-year-old advertising canvasser. He moved through his quiet house with a gentle, deliberate grace.
He was a man of the senses. His world was one of textures, smells, and tastes. He enjoyed the inner organs of animals and birds. This morning he wanted a pork kidney. He spoke to the cat as it wound around his legs. Then he set out for the butcher's.
Back in the kitchen, the kidney sizzled in the pan. It released a fine tang that pleased him. He prepared a tray with tea, toast, and the kidney. It was an act of simple care for his wife, Molly. Molly was still in bed.
He brought the breakfast to her in the bedroom. Molly was a lush, dark-haired singer. She accepted the tray with a languid air. With the breakfast, Bloom delivered the mail. His eyes caught the familiar handwriting on an envelope. It was addressed to her.
The letter was from Hugh Blazes Boylan, her concert manager. Bloom knew what the letter meant. It was a dull, constant ache in his chest. Boylan would be coming to the house at 4 o'clock. The knowledge did not make him angry. It was a familiar wound he had learned to live with.
He read a letter from their daughter, Millie. But even her cheerful words led back to his central sorrow. He had a son once, Rudy. The boy had lived only 11 days. Since that loss a decade ago, he and Molly had not known true intimacy.
The memory was a ghost that haunted their house. It was a silence that filled every room. He was a father without a son, a husband in name only. Yet he endured. He moved through his day with quiet compassion. His was not an epic of grand deeds, but of quiet survival.
Stephen, having fled the tower, was now in a classroom. He stood before unruly boys at Mr. Deasy's school. He felt a universe of distance between himself and them. He was teaching history, a subject he felt trapped by.
After the lesson, a student named Sergeant lingered. The boy had an ugly, earnest face. He needed help with his math problems. Looking at him, Stephen was struck by a thought. Amor matris, mother's love. He saw in the boy a portrait of his own youth. A creature only a mother could love.
His thoughts were broken by the headmaster, Mr. Deasy. Mr. Deasy was a pompous man, full of tedious opinions and anti-Semitism. Stephen collected his small payment. He listened to Deasy's lecture on the ills of the world. In that stuffy office, the words formed in his mind. History, he thought, is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake.
He left the school and went to Sandy Mount Strand. It was a wide, wet beach. Here, alone with the sea and the sky, his mind was free. The world became a text, and he was its reader. The crunch of shells, the colors of the water, the sigh of the tide. These were signatures he was there to read.
His thoughts began to shift and change, like the sea god Proteus. He thought about the nature of perception. His mind wrestled with the fabric of reality. He saw a dog on the sand. In his imagination, it became a bear, a wolf, a panther. Each idea triggered another in a cascade of thoughts.
But for all their brilliance, his thoughts brought no peace. He was a vessel of intellect, but empty of connection. He felt a profound, aching loneliness. He felt the sterile sorrow of an artist who could not create. He knew the great words of philosophy and theology. But he did not know that word known to all men. Love.
He tried to capture the feeling in a poem, but only fragments came. He was brought back to reality by a simple physical need. He urinated against a rock. The act was a stark contrast to his complex thoughts. He was trapped in the prison of his own intellect. He was haunted by guilt he could not escape or create from.
Later that morning, Mr. Bloom was in a carriage. It was creaking on its way to Glasnevin Cemetery. He was going to the funeral of an acquaintance, Paddy Dignam. He shared the carriage with 3 other men: Martin Cunningham, Jack Power, and Stephen's father, Simon Dedalus.
The carriage was a small version of Dublin society, and inside it Bloom was an island. Their conversation flowed around him. They shared assumptions and prejudices he could not join. They passed a Jewish moneylender, and the men cursed him. They were indifferent to Bloom's presence.
The talk turned to suicide. The other men condemned it as a coward's act. A wave of pain washed over Bloom. His own father had died by his own hand. It was a sorrow he carried in the quietest chambers of his heart. Martin Cunningham tried to change the subject, but the cut had been made.
Through the window the city slid by. Bloom's gaze caught a familiar figure. It was a young man in mourning clothes walking alone. "There's a friend of yours gone by, Dedalus," he said. It was Stephen. For a moment, their paths had crossed. 2 solitary wanderers.
Then, a more jarring sight. A jaunting car passed them. On it sat Blazes Boylan. He tipped his hat to their carriage. A knot of panic tightened in Bloom's stomach. The 4 o'clock hour loomed in his mind. It was a future event casting a dark shadow over the present.
While the others traded stories, Bloom's mind drifted. He thought of the great, silent mystery of death. He thought of it not with piety, but with curiosity. He considered the practicalities of burial and decay. He thought of how a corpse could fertilize the earth and bring forth new life.
At the cemetery, Bloom's thoughts were a quiet counterpoint to the mourning rituals. He was an outsider here. Not just because of his heritage, but his perspective. Where they saw sin and salvation, he saw facts. The simple, profound, and often absurd facts of life and death. His empathy was a form of silent resistance.
By 5 o'clock, Bloom was at Barney Kiernan's pub. He was there to meet Martin Cunningham on an errand of mercy for a widow. But the pub was a cave, and in its depths was a monster. He was known only as the Citizen. He was a one-eyed, belligerent Irish nationalist. His patriotism was a weapon he used to batter the world.
The air was thick with xenophobia and hatred. Bloom, a non-drinker, stood apart. His sobriety was another mark of his otherness. A false rumor spread that he had won money on a horse race. The men eyed him with suspicion. The Citizen began to bait him, his words dripping with anti-Semitism.
For a time, Bloom endured it. His passivity was a shield. But even the most patient soul has a limit. The Citizen questioned his very identity. He questioned his right to call himself Irish. And something in Leopold Bloom finally broke its tether.
"Ireland," Bloom said, his voice steady and clear. "I was born here. Ireland." He met the Citizen's hateful glare without flinching. He said his allegiance was to a people defined by shared suffering. "And I belong to a race too," he said, "that is hated and persecuted."
The men scoffed, their minds too narrow. They spoke of force, of nations, of retribution. Bloom offered them a different vision, Love, he said. The word fell like a drop of cool water into a furnace. I mean the opposite of hatred.
Martin Cunningham, sensing danger, hustled Bloom out of the pub. As they escaped, the citizen roared with fury. He seized a biscuit tin and hurled it after them. It clattered harmlessly on the street. The modern Odysseus had faced the Cyclops. His victory was one of quiet, unyielding decency.
Midnight found them in Nighttown, Dublin's red light district. It was a labyrinth of squalor and shadow. Stephen, drunk and reckless, had come here seeking oblivion. And Bloom, driven by a paternal, protective urge, had followed him.
Inside the brothel of Bella Cohen, the world dissolved. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. For Bloom, it was a trial. Figures from his day rose to accuse him of sins and perversions. He was a cuckold, a forger, a deviant. The accusations were a chorus of his own insecurities.
The formidable Bella Cohen transformed into a domineering man, Bello. Bello taunted him with his failures. Bello jeered at his masculinity. Bello described the virility of Blazes Boylan. In this waking nightmare, Bloom was feminized and humiliated. It was a necessary hell he had to pass through to find his resilience.
For Stephen, the hallucination was more terrifying. From the floorboards, a figure began to rise. It was the rotting ghost of his mother. Her face was wasted. Her breath smelled of wetted ashes. She spoke of God's mercy and wrath. Her voice was the echo of his guilt.
He begged her for the word known to all men, but she only offered judgment. With a cry of defiance, he shouted, "No!" He lifted his ashplant cane. He smashed the lampshade. The room was plunged into chaos. It was an act of desperate rebellion to shatter the past.
In the chaos, Bloom became the anchor. He calmly paid for the damage. He gathered Stephen's things. He guided the younger man out of the brothel. His compassion, tested by humiliation, became an active, paternal force.
In the street, the night's violence was not yet over. Stephen, still drunk, argued with two English soldiers. A sharp exchange of words, a flash of anger. A fist sent Stephen sprawling, unconscious, to the cobblestones. Bloom rushed to his side. He was a guardian against the brutish reality of the world.
He knelt beside the fallen young man. And then he saw it, a vision. Against the dark wall, a boy appeared. He was 11 years old, dressed in a smart Eton suit. It was his son, Rudy. Not as a dying infant, but as he might have been. A bright, living boy.
The apparition read from its book, smiling. It was a vision born of Bloom's deepest grief and his newfound purpose. In the act of fathering this lost young man, he had, for a fleeting, miraculous moment, resurrected the son he had lost. A whisper escaped his lips, full of a decade of sorrow. "Rudy!"
Bloom helped Stephen to his feet. He guided him through the sleeping city. They went back to the sanctuary of 7 Eccles Street. Bloom had forgotten his key. He had to climb over the railings and let himself in through the kitchen.
In the quiet of his own kitchen, the chaos of night town seemed a distant dream. He lit a fire in the stove. He filled the kettle, and its song was the only music. He made them both cocoa. It was a simple act of hospitality, but it felt as profound as any sacrament.
They sat in the small hours of the morning. Two wanderers come to a temporary harbor. They talked of their lives, of music, of their shared histories. Their communion was not in grand declarations. It was in the quiet, shared peace of this moment.
Later, they stood side by side in the back garden. They urinated together into the dark earth. A final, silent act of simple human fellowship. Bloom offered him a place to stay. But Stephen, his own journey not yet over, declined. He shook Bloom's hand and disappeared into the darkness.
Bloom returned to his bedroom. Molly was asleep. He could feel the faint indentation in the mattress where Boylan had been. But the sharp sting of jealousy had faded. It was replaced by a vast, quiet acceptance. His long day was done. He had endured the city, faced its monsters, and found a son. He had come home.
He slipped into bed beside his wife. As he drifted to sleep, his thoughts turned to her. He drifted back through the years, past the grief. He remembered a sun-drenched afternoon on Hoth Head. He remembered the rhododendrons, the sea, and her in his arms. He remembered asking her to marry him.
He saw her as she was then, a flower of the mountain. He heard her voice, a torrent of life and love, a promise and an affirmation. He heard the word that was the beginning and the end of everything, the word that answered all questions of his life. It echoed in his heart as he finally came to rest. Yes.
And so ends our journey through James Joyce's Ulysses. A story of wandering, of sorrow, and of finding our way home.
Thank you for listening to Slow English Stories. We hope you'll join us next time for another classic told simply.